Hello, everyone. We're glad you could join us for our webinar today, hosted by Mocana and DigiCert. I'm Tim McAllister. I'm the Vice President of Business Development and head up our partnership and alliance efforts here at Mocana. Today, we'll be reviewing IoT security, how to avoid the common pitfalls of using keys and certificates. We'll also cover some of the key use cases and challenges we see our customers faced with. Then we'll follow up with some of the innovative ways that Mocana and DigiCert have come together to help our customers mitigate those risks and avoid those pitfalls. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters today. First, we have Srinivas Kumar, who serves at Mocana's Chief Product Officer and CTO. He has more than 30 years of hands-on engineering and management experience in computer networking and security. Prior to joining Mocana, he was CTO of Tessera. He founded Taskware in 2011, then acquired by Tessera in 2012. During his time at Taskware, he served as an entrepreneur in residence at SRI International. Prior to that, he was a solution architect in the networking and security business unit at VMware. He was previously VP of Engineering and Solutions Architect for identity-based access controls at Applied Identity until it was acquired by Citrix. He has served in senior project and architect roles at Nortel, Lucent, and Transwitch. Earlier in his career as an engineer manager for firearms training systems, acquired by Megit Training Systems, he led the design and development of real-time marksmanship and squad engagement simulators for training law enforcement personnel and the military. He currently holds 28 US patents in the field of cyber protection for IoT, cybersecurity, user and application identity-based access controls, network and endpoint security, and evidence-based predictive analytics. He's led engineering efforts to certify products for common criteria, FIPS, DO 178, US Defense Department, and NATO standards. He holds a B degree in electrical engineering from Bombay University and an MS degree in electrical and computer engineering from Clemson. Quick hello, Srinivas.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Tim, for the introduction.
Yeah, and now our next presenter, Mike Nelson, who is the Vice President of IoT security at DigiCert, a leader in digital security. In his role, Mike oversees the company's strategic IoT market development for critical infrastructure industries. Mike frequently consults with organizations, contributes to media reports, and speaks at industry conferences about how technology can be used to improve cybersecurity for connected systems. Before DigiCert, Mike spent his career in IT healthcare, including time at the US Department of Health and Human Services, GE Healthcare, and Levitt Partners. Mike's passion for the industry stems from his personal experience as a type 1 diabetic and his use of connected technology in his treatment. Quick hello for Mike.
Hey, Tim. Srinivas, it's good to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And just a note for everyone, we are recording this session and we'll be passing along a link to the recorded session in a few days after today's webinar for all those that registered. Now let's jump into our session. Please remember that you can submit your questions as we move along through the discussion and the material. You can submit your question using the questions option button at the bottom of the menu. So Srinivas, let's start with you. What are some of the reasons that cybersecurity has become top of mind for most enterprises globally?
Well, let's begin by looking at the status quo in cyberspace today. So when you look at how cyberwars are happening today, cyber attacks today are staged by organized cybercrime syndicates and nation-state actors using sophisticated tools and methods. This is only the beginning. On a global scale, there are millions of ransomware attacks each day. Based on which study you see estimated 750 million ransomware attacks estimated this year. And ransomware is just one of hundreds of strains. And as you see in the PBS report, 6 trillion is what is estimated when you look at all potential attacks. And then when you start looking at the cost, the estimated total cost of damage is in the millions of dollars per incident. These costs pile on with forensic investigations, recovery of physical and logical data assets that are either compromised or stolen, service outages in critical infrastructure. You saw the Colonial pipeline attacking gas pipelines, transformers and energy grids, air conditioning and HVAC systems. And the cyber insurance companies pick up the tab with the payouts. And ultimately, the device vendors face the consequences of brand damage. So there is a bigger cost of harm than even reported. So Mike, from your perspective, what are you seeing in terms of trends?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I think everybody who's joined this probably knows that cyber attacks are not going to diminish. They're not going to start slowing down. I think ransomware, I had a discussion recently about predictions for the next few years. And I think ransomware attacks will continue. I think from an IoT perspective, it will become really interesting as more of those attacks begin to impact operational technology. Critical infrastructure will be, I think, certainly a target for those attacks. And we're seeing more and more, operational technology be shut down based on ransomware. Last week I sat on a plane next to a CEO of a big energy company who had just been hit with a very sophisticated ransomware attack. And I think, we've seen some target markets. Healthcare's had a ton, just the common targets. But I think what we're going to see is more sophisticated targeting at people within those organizations who maybe hold the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, but also venturing into markets, critical infrastructure that really haven't been hit or the headlines haven't made the media yet. So I definitely think that we'll see more ransomware and just cyber attacks in general. I think that quote by PBS is accurate. We have customers right now. I recently spoke to a CISO at a Fortune 500 company who part of their regular practice now is to simulate cyber attacks within their organization to see if they're prepared. And I think all of those are indications that organizations are waking up. They're starting to do the right thing. They're starting to prepare. And so, more attacks, and hopefully with that, more focus will be put on doing the right thing to prevent them.
So with Cyberwars almost becoming a forever war and a daily war, how do we design a zero trust solution architecture? We have to begin somewhere. So let's look at three important aspects of cyber protection, namely keys, certificates, and devices. So how do certificates provide protection? They help de-risk cyber attacks with authentication and tamper-resistant content delivery as very fundamental building blocks. They provide secure attributes to protect user and device private information, because privacy is as important as security. And private information that is stored in databases can be easily stolen during a data breach. And certificates also help eliminate the single points of failures if configured judiciously. If certificates can provide such protections, why do devices require protection? Well, that's where you have to look at the zero trust architecture, where certificates can be used to secure transactions, whether it is a SSL or SSH session or transport session, but not the private keys residing on the devices. That's really the golden keys that you have to protect. Therefore, protecting the private key becomes the responsibility of device vendors, device platforms, and the line of business application developers. And while certificates can be renewed based on whatever periodicity you want, keys remain perpetual unless you rotate them periodically. So that basically is the building blocks to get to a zero trust architecture. I'll pass it on to Mike to talk about how certificates play a significant role in this zero trust architecture.
Yeah, thanks, Srinivas. I think that to emphasize your point, certificates have been used for a long time to secure connections. In the PKI space, I always say PKI works. It's a trusted solution, but it continues to evolve, and it's being used in more and more new and innovative ways. And in recent years, we've seen a dramatic increase in using certificates to authenticate, to perform mutual authentication for devices, whether that be to a gateway or a server or another device, to facilitate encryption of sensitive data. secure over-the-air updates, and the integrity of those, making sure malware. PKI works and those solutions work, but they need to be done correctly, and that's part of what we're here talking about today. Is we're really excited. Srinivas, I'll just take a moment to talk about our partnership, but the partnership that Mocana and DigiCert bring together really provide a comprehensive security approach that helps address some of the challenges. If you want to advance to the next slide, Srinivas, that we commonly see in IoT. And I've got these listed, and what we're going to do for the webinar today is we're going to go through and we're going to talk through these, and we're going to talk through some of the challenges that we have heard from our customers and how they're going about getting around those. And so I hope that that's impactful. I hope that's helpful for those who are attending today to get a better understanding of some of the challenges and what other organizations are doing to overcome those. And Srinivas, we want to do it kind of conversation style. If you guys have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I already saw one that said my audio is a little bit quiet, which I've never been told before. I'll just say that. I've never been told that I'm too quiet. But I hope that's better. I'm trying to speak a little more loudly and closer to the microphone. But if you have questions, please send them in under the features that are part of the Zoom webinar. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Let's have, so we're going to actually turn the tables and ask questions of you here with a survey question. And if we could pop that up. We're not sure if we'll be able to get to all these survey questions, but has the emphasis on application security by design using keys and certificates for zero trust changed in your organization this year? And then if you could respond to that poll, there's a couple of options. Pick the choice, the single choice that is where you're at. That would be
and it won't tell us your name or what your choice was. It pulls it up, right? De-identifies it.
Totally it anonymizes the inputs, correct. And it's only going to show percentages. So just another couple of seconds here. Really appreciate everybody. Thank you. And let's, any other answers? All right, let's end the poll and post the results. And share the results. Awesome. So I'll let you talk to this, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's surprising. So 42% of respondents said, yes, the priority has changed, but no action has been initiated. So it sounds like there is a shift, organizations moving more to using keys and certificates to establish zero trust. And that's good. I'm glad to see that. So jumping into the challenges, I'll just do a quick high level and then we'll go through each of these. But from a self-signed perspective, I typically hear about self-signed certificates when organizations are coming to us because of a pain point that they are dealing with because of the use of self-signed certificates. They present challenges, and I'll talk through those in a little bit. But that certainly can present challenges as a PKI expands in an organization. Small PKI deployments can be supported with self-signed, but as it scales and as you look for more interoperability, self-signed certificates can present some challenges that we'll talk through. The second one is around lifecycle management. I tell the story when I joined DigiCert and started our IoT practice a little over 6 years ago. The volume of certificates that DigiCert had provisioned at that time was in the millions, the low millions, and those were predominantly SSL TLS certificates. With IoT, we now have customers that are issuing 100 million certificates on an annual basis. The management and the complexity of controlling those, having visibility and insight into those, having very robust lifecycle management capabilities for automated renewal, for revocation, for control is really, really important as an organization's use of private PKI and certificates and keys goes up. It's very important to have tools and technology that allow you to support and scale in a controlled and secure way. The third security challenge we're going to talk about today is OTA, or not just OTA, but secure device update. We regularly, in speaking with organizations, it's still somewhat surprising to me how frequently, as we begin discussions, we realize that organizations aren't planning for updates, and they're not thinking through the right processes and how to do it in a controlled and a secure way, how to communicate with the devices, how to provision those updates. And that is a common problem that keys and certificates are used to help facilitate. Another one, and this may ring bell, seeing some of the participants, I know that some of you are experiencing this one, but I refer to this as certificate validation in restricted networks. So this is an instance where you have a device that is in an environment that has restrictions, whether it's preventing it from making calls to receive updates or whatnot. How do you manage and operate certificates and keys, or a PKI, in an instance where a device is not connecting to the network because of restrictions? We're going to talk about how you can do that and ways that we see our customers solving that problem. And then the last one, I mentioned it around lifecycle management, but I think it's strong enough to have its own point, which is automation. Having to manually renew or manually revoke when things go wrong is a very challenging thing to do when so many certificates are being managed. And with IoT, the volume of certificates goes up dramatically. And so automating workflows, automating those types of management functions like revocation, renewal, having transparency, visibility is really important. And the last one I'll mention, I lumped these together. I'm not sure that they should be lumped together, but one of the challenges we see is environments where you have devices for multiple vendors that need to communicate. An example of this would be electric vehicles, charging stations. So we're doing a lot of work in that space right now. You have a charging station and you have devices from many different OEMs that are coming to connect into that charging station. All of those vehicles need to be authenticated. The user needs to be identified. Financial transaction needs to occur, and it needs to be done in a secure and a seamless way. The interoperability of those devices can be facilitated through appropriate root management, certificates, and keys. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but the interoperability component is a challenge that we hear a lot, how to do that. Hospitals are another example of that. You bring tons of devices into an environment, you want them all speaking to, and connecting and having interoperability with data and being able to communicate. And so those complex environments where you have multiple vendors that are trying to communicate with each other is another thing where PKI thrives, but it's a challenge that we see organizations work to overcome. So Srinivas, if you'll advance to the next slide, we'll just dive in really quickly. And before I do, Srinivas, anything else you want to say at a high level on those challenges?
Yeah, so basically the overarching theme here is the visibility and control that you need when it comes to OT. Because in a zero trust architecture, nothing happens unless devices connect. And so establishing that peer-to-peer trust in a way that you don't need to have a broker in the middle, as we move away from classical IT style client server architectures to peer-to-peer, like Mike just said, a vehicle and a charging station. Those are two devices. There's no broker in the middle. How do you ensure trust?
Yep. That's great. All right, so now we're going to jump
to the next slide.
Yeah, we're going to jump in and kind of dive into each of these. On self-signed certificates, a couple of things that I want to point out. The Ponemon Institute does a PKI trend study, and in their most recent one that was printed last year, they reported that 54% of organizations have no idea how many certificates are in their organization. They don't know where they reside. They don't know who owns them. They don't know when they expire. I tell people all the time, that is a major risk for your organization. Lack of control of those is a big concern. If you do not know when certificates are going to expire, you will have devices that are bricked, that aren't going to work. You'll have systems that that go dark. And so it's very important to have control. DigiCert also, we did our own survey recently, and we found that most organizations on average, we interviewed over 500 medium to large enterprises, and on average, organizations managed 50,000 certificates, and that number is growing dramatically each year. Of those 50,000 certificates, the organizations reported that on average, anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 of those 50,000 certificates were unmanaged, meaning they had no idea where they were, how to control them, how to renew them, when they expired. And that is a massive risk. When I speak with CISOs and they tell me what keeps them up at night, it's the unknown. It's the things that are waiting to explode that they have no idea are out there. Certificates can be that challenge, and it's really important when deploying PKI to have that visibility. Self-signed certificates, while in small deployments can work, when you try to scale, it becomes very hard to manage. And those deployments can get out of control. You lose management capabilities like rapid revocation, being able to identify a certificate or a key that's been compromised, having the ability to very quickly revoke that certificate and renew it with a new certificate is very important. Self-signed certificate platforms do not provide that, and it's important to have that and to be able to act quickly. Man-in-the-middle attacks are very common with self-signed certificate deployments. Getting the keys to the kingdom and being able to masquerade around in your environment as a trusted actor is a scenario no security expert wants. And so if you're going down that route, make sure you have full control. But of course, as the largest provider of PKI products and services, we always encourage people to look at our products and make sure that they're using platforms that allow them to maintain that control, that transparency. The other limitation of self-signed certificates speaks to that interoperability challenge that I just talked about, where you have multiple where you have devices from multiple vendors trying to work together. There are a lot of different ecosystems that DigiCert is involved in, where this is very relevant. The Zigbee Alliance right now is working on a project initially known as Project CHIP, Connected Home over IP. It's a great project that is working to drive interoperability for smart home, smart IoT devices, having them speak the same language so that any IoT device you put in your home can securely and seamlessly connect with any of the virtual assistants. Security is also part of that scope, and the way they facilitate that interoperability and allowing those devices to do that is through the use of shared roots, establishment of trust, and knowing that those devices have shared trusted credentials. Another one I'll quickly mention is AeroMax. It's a great project being run by that organization, and it's for ground-to-air communication. So as an airplane is approaching any airport, you think about the number of systems an airplane has to communicate with, weather, moisture levels on the surface runway, the air traffic control. There are a lot of different systems that airplanes connect to as they're coming in for a landing. PKI is used to facilitate seamless interoperability in that ecosystem. A lot of different vendors, Siemens and all, tons of vendors who are providing the technology that's on the ground, and then all of the airlines. And PKI and the use of shared routes are used there to facilitate that seamless connection. I'll stop there, but I think, with self-signed certificates, you cannot establish that shared root approach. And so this is where we encourage manufacturers to be thoughtful in the roots, the ICAs that they're spinning up, because we are seeing more and more the need for that interoperability. As devices go into different customer environments, the customers are wanting that interoperability, and that cannot be achieved through self-signed certificates. I'll pause there and see, Srinivas, if there's anything else you'd add to the self-signed discussion.
Well, I'll just add that basically this is a choice of convenience over security. Self-signed certificates is really based on an implicit trust model, out of sight, out of mind. And that's a lurking danger. With managed certificates, if you implement the principle of least privilege, which is very fundamental to governance, then a lot of single points of failures can be eliminated with restricted key usage. And so those are important aspects to consider as the pitfalls of self-signed certificates and the advantage of managed certificates.
Awesome. Well, let's jump to the next one. Srinivas, I think you're going to walk us through challenge number 2. You jumped to 3.
Yeah, I think
there you go. Perfect.
Okay, do you see the slide?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is the life cycle management. There are various service lifetime activities to consider, from onboarding devices to offboarding devices, which is the whole life cycle. The scalability of millions of devices with short-lived certificates, where you have to periodically renew the certificates, versus long-lived certificates, which require maintaining revocation lists and so on, can be a perceived challenge. And when you say challenges, we'll also talk about the solutions. There's the administrative expenses in terms of handling expired certificates in the field with truck rolls and service downtime that might result as a consequence. The protection of keys and certificates in transit, including how you generate the keys, how do you rotate the keys with high entropy, how do you generate them, and how do you renew certificates and do the rekeys. And then the supply chain tamper resistance is really to establish the chain of trust for content delivery, whether it's over air, over wire, or over the media. And then there are other aspects of certificate authority rollover for migration in the future without a vendor lock-in, or handling certificate revocation that Mike talked about, and also remote wipe of keys on field devices when you decommission them. So these are the aspects of lifecycle management that have to be addressed. Mike, you want to have something to add?
No, I think you hit it. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Just make sure you plan for robust management.
Right. So that brings us to the use case that Mike mentioned about OTA and secure device updates. Fundamentally, there are 4 challenges. What is lacking today is a root of trust anchor, and we'll talk about why it's so important. Then you need to have secure communications, whether you're doing it over the air or with a field service engineer. There are resource constraints on devices. The brownfield and greenfield devices have their own limitations. And then there's the matter of how do you ensure the supply chain integrity in the content delivery process. And if you just look back, for example, at the type of attack that happened where SolarWinds was compromised. So that begs the question: is code signing enough? Well, it is required, but you also have to make sure the process is protected. So brownfield and greenfield devices which lack a hardware, firmware, or software-based root of trust. The root of trust is the genesis of immutable identity, authoritative identity, because without the identity, how do you issue a certificate, right? So this is like, you need to have a birth certificate before you can get a passport. Device updates, the secure communication aspect of that using a transport protocol, whether you do it over the air, on Wi-Fi, or over the wire, is important because the alternative is not very encouraging. In air gap or restricted networks, where you have to send a field service engineer or do a truck roll, widely distributed devices, geographically just not possible. The resource constraints on devices, whether it's processing capacity, the amount of memory available, the flash, they will all impose restrictions on key generation and certificate chain validation, as we'll talk about later. And the supply chain integrity is essential because you want to eliminate blind spots in the supply chain. In addition to code signing, which is absolutely important, a multi-person rule is required for separation of duties that must be enforced for a protected chain of custody. Right? As you know, you don't want to pick up a USB stick that somebody left at your door and insert it into a nuclear plant device there. So that's why it's important how that content delivery is handled. Mike, do you have anything you want to add on this from your perspective as a certificate authority?
No, I think there's been a lot of focus on supply chain integrity, and we're going to talk about the solution for that in a little bit. So I think that'll be good. But I think it's really important to have integrity on all parts of your supply chain, and knowing that when you are deploying something into the field, that it has integrity, and you're doing the right things to ensure that. And we'll talk through a solution for that in a little bit.
So moving on to the certificate validation, which in a restricted network is the challenge. If you have an open network, obviously you're using HTTPS every day and things just work. But in restricted OT environments, the multi-factor validation that happens is a necessity. So you typically start with a certificate chain validation by the client on the device, which is harder to accomplish on memory constrained devices, depending on how long the certificate chain is. And then there is the extended certificate attributes that must be validated by the application policies, especially in closed PKI systems. Certificate validation can happen in various ways, and there are weak and strong validations. And ultimately, when the server certificate is sent back to the client, like when your web browser receives the certificate of the website you're visiting, the browser has to validate that that certificate has not expired. So the certificate status verification happens through an online protocol, the OCSP, which is the Online Certificate Status Protocol. However, if you're sitting in a restricted network where typically your mission critical devices don't see the light of day and are not allowed to communicate to the internet, then you have a challenge. So that's where in a restricted network, the server does OCSP stapling because it can access the root of trust on the CA side because the outbound access is cut off in the enterprise. And so that basically is how you can still use strong certificates and validation, even in a restricted network, with the caveat that you have to plan your architecture. And then you can go one level further to zero trust, because zero trust builds on the notion of explicit trust. This begins with trusted identity, derived from the root of trust for non-repudiation, followed by mutual authentication to establish that two-way trusted connection. And so once you do this with certificate validation and mutual certificate validation, even in a restricted network, you can achieve the concept of zero trust.
Yeah, I would say on this, Srinivas, I mean, this is so common in IoT. I mentioned hospitals earlier. So many hospitals have restrictions on what they allow devices within their system to do. And oftentimes gateways or servers are used where all of those devices will communicate to a gateway, and that gateway makes the calls, receives the updates, and then they're provisioned to the hospital, to the devices within the hospital from there. This is very, very common in IoT deployments in all different industries because of, you think about the types of environments where IoT devices are being deployed. Frequently, there is not strong connectivity or a strong network for those devices to connect to. And so this is a solution. And what we say to our customers all the time is, don't let this prevent you from doing the right thing. You can still set up a very strong approach that works.
Like we have a question come in. Why don't we take time now to answer it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that's a great question. The question was about passwords. We know they can be compromised. Can certificates be compromised? So this really comes down to the way in which keys are secured and controlled. And when we work with organizations, we always make sure that they are doing the right things around key management and key storage. And the partnership that Mocana and DigiCert have, there's a great solution for secure storage and use of those keys. If those keys are put out into the wild, If someone gets them, then yes, they can be compromised. But with proper controls and protections in place, PKI is a proven solution that when it's done right, it works. Anything else you'd say on that, Srinivas?
Yeah, so it's true that anything can be compromised, right? With the electron microscope, even a root of trust can be compromised. But when it comes to the certificate itself as an artifact, what we do with the Trust Center and trusted solutions that we provide, we have taken certificate validation to the next level of beyond what's in the certificate, right? Certificate validation is validating what's in the certificate, but there's also other checks and balances that are essential to make sure that the certificate itself is not a forgery. Because with nation state attacks today, with quantum computing, you could actually generate a certificate that looks like it came from a valid certificate authority. But the PKI infrastructure and the system allows for that type of robustness and protection, but it's a matter of how you implement it. So from Mocana's Trust Center perspective, we also deal with how do we validate the certificate itself is genuine beyond what's in the certificate. And that's a topic for a different conversation. But yes, certificates can be compromised by nation state attacks and quantum computing,
Yep.
but there are solutions that we have implemented in Trust Center. And it's also within the scope of PKI.
Yeah.
And that's really the advantage of PKI. And you've heard of a blockchain and all these concepts, but like Mike said, if the key is compromised, all bets are off, right? That's a given. But in addition to that, certificates give you that additional layer of authenticity.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks.
So we'll quickly cover the automation aspects and the interoperability that we talked about. And why is this important? Because when you look at the real world, whether you're in the industrial control systems or healthcare, looking at a Purdue model, or whether you're looking at a mesh architecture, fundamentally automation is essential. Because in the real world, NOC, SOC operators, device management systems, application management systems have to deal with life cycle of keys and certificates throughout the lifetime of these multi-vendor devices and line of business applications, right? Even if you're using a managed certificate, it's important for the application developer and for the NOC, SOC operators to have visibility. Where are these certificates sitting? How strong are they? When are they going to expire? And so on. And when you have millions of devices, you cannot eyeball them on a dashboard. So automation is important. The interoperability comes in with field devices. When you look at a typical layer 0 industrial control system, there are many vendors. So, and they all deal with their own PKI, public, private PKIs, and there are closed PKIs. So it's a hybrid environment. And when you go to large scale deployments, you have to accept the fact that there will be a fusion of multiple PKI systems. So interoperability, standards driven, is very important. Standards-based protocols are required to achieve both the degree of automation necessary to protect keys and certificates in transit. And interoperability is in a globally fragmented market when you take into consideration the export and import controls on cryptography. Right? Just because you're using a key insert does not make your product easily exportable out of the US. So you have to worry about import-export regulations and how do you do interoperability when, let's say you're making your product in North America and you have to ship it to APAC, there are import restrictions in China and so on. Right, so that's basically how, working with DigiCert, what Mocana has done is we have built Trust Center to provide that zero trust architecture for IT/OT convergence, because keys and certs are used very much in the IT world, and DigiCert is a big player in this space, and Mocana plays down in the layer 0, 1, and 2. So when you look at this architecture, there's a natural fusion of IT and OT, and that's where we bring in this integration with DigiCert to build this zero trust architecture and also make it such that you can implement this solution very flexibly. It can be on-prem or it can be in the cloud. It can be in any of the popular clouds you want, like Azure, AWS, and Google, and so on, or you can do it on-prem. Mike, anything?
Well said, Srinivas. Nope, that was great.
Okay, unless there are any questions, I'll keep moving. But let me know if you have any questions, because I'm not seeing the question panel.
Yeah, no, I don't think they're. I think we're good. But I think now we transition to the partnership between our companies, and I think this is really exciting as we can show. We're going to show 3 different use cases to show how our solutions together are helping to solve some common challenges.
The first use case really comes up with the whole cycle of a technician taking a unit out of the box and connecting it to the fabric and says, I just powered on this device, and this device is going to get its IP address, and it can be any type of device. And we just showed an example of a network element. It could be any kind of a OT device or IT device for that matter. And the most important thing in device onboarding is you want to make sure that as simple as possible, and it gets to one touch in a way that the device can be identified all the way from the manufacturer using what is known as the manufacturer's initial ID and the local ID that the plant, the device owner operator wants to give. And this is based on a IEEE 802.1 AR standard. And that basically gives you two forms of IDs issued by two different entities as a means of saying this is a genuine device. And I'm okay with bringing it into my network. Once that happens, from Mocana's Trust Fetch client on the device, it'll enroll and register the device. It'll automatically communicate with DigiCert 1 and generate all the certificates and the keys that are required in order to perform all the functions that that device is supposed to perform. All the different types of keys using the principle of least privilege, all of that can be configured. And in a snap, those keys are generated locally on the device, or it can be generated on the server side and certificates issued. So this basically abstracts the any perceived complexity of PKI and makes it look like a snap. And once the device has its first time certificates issued, the next step is updates. So you want to make sure you push. A lot of times the devices are sitting on shelf for 6 months, they arrive, we power it on, and before you know, you say the firmware is out of date. So the first step is really to make sure the firmware is up to date, the configuration is up to date. And all that happens through Trust Center, again, through a supply chain provenance that can trace it back to the developer to make sure that this content coming in has a valid supply chain. And then last but not the least, you also have to manage the life cycle of the artifacts that were just issued, the keys and certs, and you do that automated, which now becomes zero touch. So there's a one touch that where you can install a brownfield or greenfield device, and the zero touch that automates the life cycle management. So this is really starting from onboarding all the way to update management. And you can pretty much do an offboarding in the same way by doing a remote wipe. Mike, you want to add something on this use case?
Sorry, I was on mute there. I would just say that, you know, this is really the magic slide. The simplification of these processes, helping with device onboarding. We hear so many organizations struggling with how to do that effectively and establish that ongoing communication, the ability to update. And this slide shows everything from device onboarding and then through updates and ongoing device management. The joint solution between us is a simplified process that brings a solution to enable all of this for your organization. I refer to this slide as the money slide because it really solves so many problems, common problems that we have heard from our customers. And that's why we've formed this partnership with Mocana, is because, you know, the solution you guys bring to this really complements PKI, and it brings it in an integrated all-in-one package, and it makes it seamless for the user, which simplifies processes, vendor relationship. So it's the money slide, and I love it. Really appreciate, the partnership and the good work that we're doing together.
Now, if you think of this, it's a plug and play architecture, whether it's a network element or a surveillance camera, a controller, a sensor, an actuator, a meter. You go into a smart city, smart factory, just plug it into the network and it just happens. So this is really bringing plug and play into a zero trust architecture.
There's two questions. I think that it would be good to answer now. Is that all right?
Sure.
First question, in step 2, what is the example of device ID? Is it a device key? How do you ensure the uniqueness of the device ID?
Yeah, the device ID that is given by the manufacturer can be either, for example, a TPM baked in. It could be a key and certificate that is issued by the manufacturer at the time of manufacturing. It can be any other artifact that they might choose, whether it is a serial number, something they might put into an NVRAM or into a flash. So that's a manufacturer issued ID. So in the case of Intel EPID, if you're familiar with Intel EPID, we can use the EPID identity that is in the chip. And as you go forward with iSIMs and eSIMs, you'll see that the processor ID is very unique and it is baked in. And that now becomes a root of trust as the first ID. And then the first ID can be used by the device owner operator to, in a very flexible way, figure out how they want to identify the device, give it a birth name. And that can be a FQDN. It can be a serial number, however they choose it.
Yep.
Right. So that's really what the IEEE 802.1 AR standard says.
Yeah.
Any internet connectivity needed for this use case?
So this similar to what we've just spoken to. If the device has internet connectivity, it can communicate directly with the device. If it's communicating through a gateway or a server, if the device is connecting to that, then this can be facilitated through that same approach. The use case we just spoke to, where there might be network restrictions.
Yeah, so yeah, it can be done without internet connectivity. It can be fully on-prem. And there's also a flavor where you can run it in a totally air-gapped network. And so Trust Center provides you those options.
Yep.
So let's jump to, appreciate the other questions coming in, but let's jump to the next use case because we have just a few minutes here.
Sure. So the next aspect we talked about was the automation and scalability. And as you see with certificates, the way it was done was quite manual. And what we have done with the enrollment over secure transport protocol is brought in automation. And this is where, as you saw in the earlier step 2 and step 3, the key generation on the device, as well as the certificate issuance is all automated. And this really eliminates the complexity of PKI from a device perspective. It makes everything remotely manageable, and it automates the complete key rotation and certificate renewal process. So this is where you can scale, where you can take millions of devices and manage them without truck rolls. If you have any questions on this, I can move to the next use case, but let me know if you have a related question on this. So this is basically how standards-based scalability can be achieved. The third use case is we talked a lot about protecting the supply chain fabric. And this is really where from the developer onwards through the multi-person rule, from code signing to encryption, signing and encrypting along the transit chain, in a way that by the time this content arrives at the device, as it moves, it gets stronger and stronger in protection and not weaker. And this is really the cryptographic vehicle that allows to not only automate the lifecycle, because when you look at the device gets updates from many sources, whether it's a firmware update, OS update, application update, a new Dockerized app, and so on. So you have many suppliers. And so this process brings in the tamper resistance. You can apply updates either over the air, or you could literally take the output from here into a stick and truck roll it on a USB stick, or you could do it over the network. To the earlier question that was asked, it does not have to be connected to the internet. It can be done in a totally air-gapped environment with the same degree of protection. And you also want to make sure that you have embedded firewall controls on the device to data diode the device. So you know that the device is not going out to unauthorized sources. If you look at how with Android phones and iPhones, you go to an app store because you trust the app store. The same way you want an embedded device to go to a trusted app store, which in this case is Trust Center. And then you want to monitor the device to make sure that unauthorized updates are not happening. And you can detect that an update was done, which was outside of supply chain. So that closes the net and makes it a closed and zero trust network. And the last use case, and then we can go to questions, is at the end of the day, you want to make sure the visibility is there and it is auditable. You want to get attestation of the platform from a root of trust that says that the device has not been tampered with. You need to have tamper evidence from a root of trust so that the measurements, for example, in the case of a TPM, is taken by the TPM. And so you can attest that a very trusted root of trust gave you these measurements. You can also monitor with the Trust Edge clients the runtime integrity, whether somebody walked up to the device, inserted a USB stick and bypassed supply chain, or whether the device connected to an unauthorized hotspot or Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, or somebody got onto the shell and modified the configuration. You can monitor those events, and those can be reported with digital signing. So you know that these events are not fake events, these are genuine events. And then you can push it out through Trust Center into AI, ML engines and orchestration engines and third-party engines. So you get a integrated view of both IT and OT systems. So I'll pause there if you have questions, and I can roll back to a previous slide if you need to.
Yeah, we had a question, Srinivas, in the use case 1 and step 3, what protocol device needs to support the secure connection? I'm
trying to get to a slide, the slide here. So
there you go.
In terms of the enrollment that happens from the device at step 3 to Trust Center, we implement the enrollment over secure transport RFC 7030, which uses the HTTPS protocol on the wire. And within that, the messaging that happens is digitally signed. So when you look at what happened here in the case of the first time enrollment, it's a chicken or egg first issue, right? So when the device is set up and provisioned, a device account is created in Trust Center, which has 0 factory default passwords. It is a unique device identifier from the initial ID and a unique and randomly generated strong password, which is sent as a digitally signed configuration to the device as part of the provisioning. And then it kicks itself to enroll using those credentials, which is one time. And once it is registered, it gets 3 sets of keys and certificates based on a principle of least privilege. And from there on, all communication between the device and Trust Center is not only digitally signed, but also encrypted. And everything is either based on the EST protocol, RFC 7030, or a API key-based secure messaging between our client and the Trust Center server.
Thank you. And then another question along these lines is, considering millions of devices are manufactured, can you explain more about how this model helps in factory automation?
Right. So in terms of automation, typically this process can actually be done with a contract manufacturer. So if you're a device owner operator, you can have your contract manufacturer or manufacturers through, let's say, a secure VPN connection, manufacture the device on their shop floor with connectivity to a Trust Center that is accessible by the manufacturer. So this is like factory provisioning. They would provision it into Trust Center, then they would box it, ship it to you. And when they power it on, all these steps have already been performed. And you literally end up at step 5. So when you want to scale, you can have your contract manufacturers pre-install the Trust Edge clients and pre-configure the core artifacts by having connectivity to the Trust Center instance. So that's basically how you would scale, by bringing it into the manufacturing process itself. Now, if you are a brownfield device, where the device is already in the field, you're following the exact same process. So there's no difference in process. It's just a matter of whether you scale through the manufacturer, the OEMs, a contract manufacturer, or you want to do it aftermarket in the field.
Yeah, you just need to add that bootstrapped configuration file, right?
Yeah, so that's all done as part of the provisioning. Yep. So what happens in an aftermarket device is you have a means of saying, I'm going to give you a bootstrap configuration because now we are going to go into this zero trust architecture. And as part of provisioning in field, you can inject those as you would have done it at the point of manufacture.
And then another question here, how do you automate certificate lifecycle management on headless devices, to renew, rekey, revoke?
Yeah, so that's also done automatically through the Trust Edge agent. When the Trust Edge agent is installed on a headless device, it automatically monitors to see when the certificates are going to expire. And based on the configuration, it will automatically renew. So the whole concept of renewal is automated. And you can also do on demand. The way you do the on demand is you just send it an update package, which is nothing but a remote command, but it's a secure encrypted update package that can nudge the device to say, I want you to do a out of band, on demand, just in time rekey. Let's say you get some indication that maybe your key is compromised or a certificate is compromised. You can proactively go and do an on demand update package, which is nothing but a remote command sent securely as if it's an update package. So you don't have to, even if it's a headless device, everything can be managed remotely without any manual intervention on the device.
Well, I think we're moving to close here. So that was a great session. Thanks so much for all taking your time and join us here today. We hope you found it valuable. We look forward to connecting with you again soon. So we do have a live demo that we can run for you and schedule that's hosted in AWS with both the DigiCert One platform as well as the Mocana Trust Center, and walk through all of our capabilities. So just reach out to us, either me directly or sales at Mocana, and we can get that scheduled and answer even more of your questions one-on-one in a one-on-one session. So, and this was a recorded session. We will be sending the link to all that registered in just a few days. And really, again, appreciate all of your time and participation and great questions. And well, that's a wrap, and enjoy your day. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Srinivas.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.